Disclaimer. I own a bunch of spells, and, the plot and stuff. J.K. Rowling owns everything else. Harry and Hermione ran through the rooms of the Department of Mysteries with two Death Eaters hot on their heels.
"Reducto!" Hermione yelled. "Harry, the cases! Reducto!"
They shattered several glass cases filled with Merlin knew what kinds of magically modified insects as they passed, hoping to set them on the Death Eaters. Incendio! The Death Eaters burned their way through the swarms immediately. This way! Harry pulled Hermione through another door, and she cast a locking charm behind them on it. This room was even worse than the last one. Here in glass cases were still beating hearts, self-breathing lungs, disembodied eyeballs that moved on their own, and all manner of other body parts from various animals.
"What is all this?" Hermione gasped.
"Who cares? Keep moving," Harry said. They kept running, praying that they wouldn't run into any more Death Eaters. Unfortunately, they couldn't escape all of the ones who were searching for them.
"Stupefy!"
Two more black-robed figures burst in from a side door that she guessed led back to the original round room.
"Swinger!"
Hermione cast automatically. The spell bounced off the double-layered shield Professor Slughorn had taught her. One of the Death Eaters followed up with a powerful piercing hex that shattered the outer layer of her shield, but thankfully didn't get past the inner one. She cast
Extonio!
Back with her red oak wand, and the flashbang spell blew up in his face, making him stagger back. She waved her vinewood wand to reinforce her shield back to 2 layers. Parasynthesia, labyrinthitis, refrigera manibus, palpebre plumbum! Harry cast rapid fire at the other one, shouting all the incapacitating spells she had taught him. He clearly had her beat in speed. Probably power, too, but his hexes bounced off the Death Eater's shields, and she regretted now not teaching him more destructive spells.
"Bombarda!"
she yelled, and that got through.
"Harry, that's not going to cut it! You need more powerful—"
There was a loud bang, and Hermione felt herself flying through the air as a massive force slammed into her side. She sprawled on the floor, her shield shattered. She scrambled to find her wands as the Death Eater loomed over her. "We don't need you, Mudblood," he said. "Diffindo!"
"Frasso!"
The little-used single-hex shield charm was the fastest one she knew to cast, and it just barely stopped the hex that would have cut her throat. She looked up in fear at the skull mask. It was the first time since McNair had grabbed her that Hermione was certain they were trying to kill her. She used the Death Eater's split second of surprise to snap off a triple twirl she had practiced so hard.
"Dredri stab!"
The Death Eater dodged, but not fast enough, as her latest creation, the shotgun curse, sent 16 miniature piercing hexes into his chest and right shoulder. He fell to the ground screaming. He wouldn't be using a wand again anytime soon. "Bombarda! Stupefy!" Harry was getting the idea. His 2-spell combo had the other Death Eater down for the count.
"Good job," she said breathlessly. "Don't be afraid to use deadly spells if you have to. Remember some of those new curses I taught you?"
Harry gulped and nodded with a determined expression. They ran to the next room, sealing the door behind them again, and Hermione stopped short. If she thought the vivisection room was bad, this one would really give her nightmares. A large tank stood in the middle of the nearly empty room, with melon-sized, gray, wrinkled orbs swimming around in it.
"They have brains in a vat," she said. "Why do they have brains in a vat?"
There was a bang behind them, and the muffled sound of shouting. "No, leave him! Leave him! The Dark Lord only wants the prophecy! Wake him up!" "Not the time," Harry said. He grabbed her by the hand and led her along the wall. They tried to double back by going through one of the other doors on that side of the room, but it turned out to lead to a completely different division. This room was dark and unfurnished, and it was a good deal larger than ought to have fit in the floor plan. The only things in it were floating and spinning models of the planets, not to scale, sadly, and a glowing sun at the center. They ran away. They were about halfway across the room when... Bang! They turned to see that 2 more Death Eaters had burst through the opposite door. "Other way! Other way!" Harry yelled as stunning spells started flying at them. "Depulso!" He banished a bunch of asteroids at them to throw them off balance.
"Non perturbar!"
Hermione threw as much power as she could into the imperturbable charm and cast it on the wide, bare floor under their feet. The frictionless surface sent the Death Eaters sprawling. They ran back through the brain room and on to the next one, sealing that door as well. They kept running, but they slowed as they noticed the appearance of the room. It was large, and built much like an amphitheater, with oversized stone benches circling a stone dais in the middle. The whole room was lit with an eerie blue light, but the only thing that looked remotely like an object of study was a stone arch on top of the dais in which a tattered black veil hung, flapping slightly as though in an unfelt breeze. Whispers seemed to emanate from the arch that they could hear all the way to the edge of the room. It was almost as if it were calling to them. "What is it?" Harry said.
"I don't know, but I've a really bad feeling about it," Hermione answered.
Suddenly she saw that they were standing completely still. They had slowed to a stop without even noticing.
"Harry, we have to keep moving,"
she urged, and she pulled him along like he had done to her before, on to the next room. This next room was even more dimly lit, the only light coming from thousands of glowing orbs of various sizes lining many towering shelves. It was barely enough to navigate by, but Harry started forward anyway. Hermione, however, had a bad feeling about it, completely different from the feeling she got from that veil. "Lumos!" she said, and she leaned over and read the nearest nameplate below one of the orbs. M.W. to A.A. Fall of Rome, 15th September, 476. She put two and two together.
"Bugger! Harry, we have to go back!" she hissed.
"What? Why?"
"This is the Hall of Prophecy! This is the last place we want to be!"
But before they could run, a horrible echoing cackle rang out like the voice of the Wicked Witch of the West, and a curtain of fire appeared between them and the door they had entered.
"Bellatrix!" she said.
"Run!" They ran past the shelf and down one of the long aisles. The curtain of fire extended down the walls, and a tendril followed behind them like a burning trail of gasoline. They tried to branch off down one of the opposite aisles, but the fire was ahead of them, blocking their path. They saw a door at row 53, but they were again cut off by the flames.
"Flame-freezing charms,"
Hermione said. Hadn't witches and wizards been using those since the Dark Ages? They cast the spell on the flames to try to get to the door, and the heat momentarily vanished, but then it returned as the flames flared higher than before, pushing them back to the center aisle.
"You'll have to do better than that, bitty baby Potter!"
Bellatrix cackled. They were trapped. She was too strong for them. Hermione still didn't understand how she could sling flame around like that. The lines of flames pushed them towards the far end of the room. For a brief moment, Hermione hoped they could get out that way, but it cut off the path in front of them, then to their right, and then behind, forcing them down row 97. The fire cut off both exits, confining them to the one row. A brief gap appeared, and two robed figures stepped through the flames. These two were not wearing masks, though. Hermione recognized both of them from the wanted posters. Bellatrix Lestrange and Augustus Rookwood, the former unspeakable.
"Causing a lot of trouble tonight, aren't you, kiddies?"
Bellatrix said in a baby-talk voice. Hermione hadn't thought there could be anything worse than Dolores Umbridge talking to her like she was 5, whilst torturing her with the quill, but Bellatrix Lestrange had her beat.
"It would have been so much easier if you'd come with Lucius and McNair. Now, Avery's face may never be the same again, not that he was a looker to start with."
She cackled at her own joke. Hermione felt a warming sensation on her hand. Her ring was heating up. She glanced down at her left hand and saw a letter T appear. "What do you want with me?" Harry said, playing dumb. It was then that she noticed that he was holding Lucius Malfoy's wand in his left hand awkwardly, allowing him to tap his own ring against it. 2 times, 3 times, I.
"Oh, don't you know, Potty?" Bellatrix said. "Dumb as a door didn't tell you. There's a prophecy about you, Potter, and it's right there."
She pointed with her wand, and the pair half turned to the side to see an orb with a nameplate that read SPT to APWBD, Dark Lord and Harry Potter, 23rd of February, 1980. 3 times, 2 times, M. Hermione didn't need to wait for the last letter. He was playing for time. The Order knew Voldemort wanted the prophecy. When they arrived, this would be the first place they looked. They just needed to stall until they arrived.
"The Dark Lord wants the prophecy, Potter, and you're going to get it for us," Bellatrix said.
"Why me?" Harry's voice sounded almost calm, but Hermione could tell he was shaking with terror. "Why go to all this trouble? Why not just grab it yourself since you're here?" "Don't be stupid, Potter," Rookwood growled. "You should know that only you and the Dark Lord can take the prophecy from the shelf." "Then have him come and get it if he wants it so bad."
"The Dark Lord come here?" Bellatrix snapped. "Whittle baby thinks he's being funny. He's too smart to come here. Not when big bad Minister Fudge is keeping him so well hidden." She switched to a deep, mannish voice when she said Fudge's name. "Why would the Dark Lord come out in the open when he can just have you get it for him, Now, here's how it's going to be." She adopted a lecturing voice that sounded disturbingly like Umbridge. "You're going to hand over that prophecy, and we'll let your know-it-all mudblood girlfriend live." "Don't do it, Harry," Hermione said quickly. "Be quiet, mudblood." "Don't do it. We can't trust them. They already tried to kill me once." "Did we? Well, we'll definitely do it if you don't do as you're told, Potty." Bellatrix leveled her wand at Hermione.
"Do it, and I'll smash the prophecy before you can get it," Harry cut in. He had a shield up with one wand, and he took a step back to where he could easily blast the prophecy on the shelf with the other. That was a gamble. They didn't know if the orbs were charmed unbreakable or something, but it seemed to work because Bellatrix and Rookwood backed off. "So little Potty know how to play," Bellatrix said. "But there's one tiny problem. She'll be dead either way if you break it." She pointed her wand at Hermione again. "But what will Voldemort do to you if you lose it?" Harry said.
"You dare speak his name?" She turned her wand on him. "I should—"
"No!" Rookwood grabbed her arm. "We need the prophecy first. We don't have to kill the mudblood to convince Potter. We just have to make him understand the cost of disobeying." A sadistic smile crossed Bellatrix's face.
"Of course," she said, turning her wand back to Hermione. "You may have your bargaining chip, Potter, but there's a lot more we can do to ours."
Hermione thought fast. No magical shield would stop the woman's favorite spell, and she didn't fancy being exposed for 1 second to a curse that could cause severe brain damage. She tried the James Bond ploy.
"How did you get Stan Shunpike in on this?" she said quickly. "He's not a Death Eater. He's too young."
She was counting on Bellatrix being the kind of cartoon villain who liked to gloat and monologue to buy more time. Time was on her and Harry's side in one respect. The Death Eaters weren't expecting help to come right away.
"But where are they?" she thought.
Fortunately, Bellatrix did have a megalomaniacal streak.
"Too dumb to be is more like it," she said with a laugh. "We used the Imperious Curse, obviously. We knew you kiddies were taking the bus to your Whittle tests. We knew you would be coming home late. And it was so easy for Lucy to arrange a distraction tonight."
So he was behind Hagrid's arrest.
"That monster!" Hermione spat. "He's the reason Sturgis Podmore was kissed, isn't he? Why Broderick Bode was killed?" "No one likes a know-it-all, mudblood," Bellatrix said, "and you've wasted enough time. Bombarda!"
The curse was so powerful that it crashed right through her shield and kept going, slamming into her left shoulder. She felt her collarbone crack, and she staggered in pain, unable to cast a new shield. "No! Reducto!" Harry yelled. The spell lanced out at the prophecy sphere, but just before reaching it, it bounced off a shield that appeared from nowhere. He turned and saw Rookwood waving his wand in his direction. "Oh, didn't I mention that?" Rookwood said smugly. Harry looked back and forth between the two Death Eaters fearfully, and then, with one swipe, he dropped Lucius's wand and picked up the prophecy and held it high above his head, still maintaining a shield with his own wand, though it must be fatiguing him by now. "I can still smash it," he said.
"Harry, no!"
Hermione coughed. That was exactly what they had wanted him to do. "Very good, Potter," Rookwood said. "That's the hard part done." He made a complicated gesture with his wand and started muttering under his breath. Suddenly a light shone against Harry's shield, and instead of shattering, it began to burn away slowly. Harry raised his arm higher as if to drop the prophecy, but Bellatrix called out, "Ah!" wagging her finger as she twirled her wand at Hermione.
"Percuto! Frasso!"
Once again, the thin layer of magic blocked the potentially lethal hex just in time. Bellatrix just laughed as Harry was seized with indecision, and Hermione was sure her next spell would be something she couldn't block. It was now or never. They had to get out. She pointed her red oak wand at Bellatrix's heart and screamed out,
Commodo cordis!
Bellatrix lazily raised a shield, but then the seemingly impossible happened. A blue bolt of energy flew at her chest, a simple bolt of magic no more dangerous than a cricket ball. But then, so fast it was nearly impossible to see, it winked out of existence in front of her shield and back into existence behind it, striking her square in the chest. The Wicked Witch had just enough time for her eyes to nearly pop out of her skull in shock before she collapsed to the floor, clutching her chest. Dridristab, Extonio! Harry cast Hermione's shotgun curse and followed up with the much easier flashbang spell. The first shattered Rookwood's shield, and the second hit him square in the face, sending him reeling back against the shelves.
Accio wand!
Hermione retrieved Malfoy's wand and added,
Harry, smash it!
He didn't hesitate, throwing the prophecy down hard. The crystal globe shattered to the ground into 1,000 pieces. A ghostly image of Sybil Trelawney rose up from the fragments.
The one with the power,
it started to say.
Deletrius,
Hermione said, just in case someone could hear, and the image vanished. Hermione, come on! Harry was well ahead of her. Without Bellatrix to keep it going, the enchanted fire was already dying out, although there were red lizards and gray snakes writhing on the floor, giving off intense heat. The fire elementals, salamanders, and ashwinders. She carefully stepped over them and ran to catch up. What did you do? Harry said.
Long story, tell you later,
she answered. She didn't particularly want to think about the fact that she'd probably just killed someone. Harry found the nearest door that would seem to lead back towards the entrance, but it was locked. He tried the next one. It opened onto a long hallway that seemed to be filled with miscellaneous enchanted artifacts. He ran off down the hall.
Harry, wait,
she said. They had to stick together in case they were boxed in again. There they are, stop them! She heard spellfire, but she couldn't see anyone. Harry was too far ahead of her. She ran to catch up and turned to the corner to see Harry dueling 2 Death Eaters. Reducto, he yelled. You're too late, confrigo! Terebradent, he said. I've already... Defindo! Smash the prophecy!
You lie! Incendio!
Harry shielded against a pillar of flame. Hermione, still out of breath from the sprint, tried one of her easier spells while the Death Eater was casting.
Trigeminal neuralgia!
The brain freeze hex struck, and the Death Eater staggered back with a pounding headache. He ripped off his mask to rub his head, and she got a clear look at his face. It was Dolohov, the one who had murdered the Weasleys' uncles. Fractus! Fractus! More unfortunately, she was momentarily distracted from the other Death Eater, and the Bonebreaker curse struck her hard in the side just above her spleen. She collapsed with probably 2 or 3 broken ribs, and she really hoped not any internal bleeding. Harry took the other curse in the shoulder as he tried to dodge. Dolohov and the masked Death Eater approached and loomed over them. Dolohov's wand glowed green, pointing at Hermione, when twin shouts of "Stupefy!" rang out behind him, and he fell to the floor. Harry and Hermione looked up to see 3 friendly faces for the first time all night.
George, Fred, Lee, thank God,
Hermione gasped. The trio rushed to them and helped them up. We got your message, George said.
Good thing. I thought we were done for in here,
she said. They didn't get the prophecy, though, Harry said weakly. What prophecy? Asked Lee. Harry winced. He'd forgotten they didn't know. Hermione, you're hurt, George said with alarm.
Yeah, I worry about that when people aren't trying to kill us,
she said. But he lifted her shirt up to inspect her ribs. She was starting to bruise there, and already had one over her collarbone. That looks really bad, he said.
Never mind that. Do we have a clear path to the exit?
The weird spinning room's just there. Lee pointed around in the next corner.
Then let's go.
She pushed forward, leaning on George at each step. It hurt to breathe, and the pain in her shoulder was getting worse, but she pressed on. George focused on helping her towards the exit, but he still looked concerned about her condition. He pulled a sweet from his pocket and handed it to her. Here, eat this, he said.
What is it?
The cure for nosebleed nougat. It's not much, but it's the best we could bring on short notice. It should slow any internal bleeding until we can get you to a hospital.
Thank you, George,
she sighed. She ate the sweet, and her nose immediately felt painfully dry, but she hoped it would be of more use for her injuries. Good thing we did those tests, eh? He said. She nodded weakly as they stumbled out the door into the round room. But as George moved to shut the door, she stopped him.
Wait, she said. Hold this door open so it doesn't spin, and try the others to find the exit.
Got it, said Lee. He, Lee, and Harry each tried a door while Hermione held hers open. Planets. Ah! Slam. Death Eaters! Slam. More Death Eaters! They could hear footsteps thudding towards them. We'll take the planets, Harry decided and dashed inside. The 2 other Death Eaters they had felled in here were long gone, but they knew more were coming. Take cover, he ordered. Keep moving, Hermione said, but she wasn't in much condition to run at this point. Instead, the 5 of them split off and hid behind Jupiter and Saturn. Do you think we can take them? Lee whispered. The doors banged open, and not 2, or 4, but 8 Death Eaters poured into the room, including Dolohov and, Hermione noted with dismay, a now maskless Lucius Malfoy and Walden McNair. I don't think so, she said. Potter destroyed the prophecy, Malfoy roared. They're useless to us now. Kill them all! Hermione readied her wand, fully expecting that they would all die in the next few minutes. They were outnumbered, overpowered, and had more injuries than the far more experienced Death Eaters. Malfoy must have gone and seen the smashed orb. Had he seen Bellatrix's body too, or had she miscalculated with her spell? The dark wizards began to spread out, penning them in. The 5 students tensed, ready to fight or run, when they heard a shout. Hey! Lucius spun around to find the source of the noise right behind him, where Sirius pulled off Harry's invisibility cloak. Get away from my godson! He punched Lucius in the face. Suddenly, 2 more doors banged open, and Remus, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, R. Shacklebolt, and Mad-Eye Moody ran into the room, wands blazing. Even Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, who didn't look that impressive at first glance, were slinging hexes at high speeds. Taken by surprise, the Death Eaters were quickly put on the defensive. Mrs. Weasley fought her way over to where they were hiding, looking fiercer than she ever had telling off Fred and George, and that was saying something. Hermione remembered her saying she was a duelist back in the day. Constrictor epoximize! Take that and that! She cried as her spells caused one of the Death Eater's robes to shrink and squeeze him whilst sticking them to his body. And Scourgify! She washed his mouth out with soap, which was surprisingly effective at stopping him from casting out loud. And that's why you don't mess with Mum, George said. For their part, the twins and Lee were throwing a mix of spells they'd covered in the DA and as many of the most ridiculous prank spells as they could think of. Fred, George! Mrs. Weasley scolded as she reached them. Oh, I just knew you'd be mixed up in this. What in Merlin's name are you doing here? We got Hermione's call for help, Mum, said George. We couldn't just leave her. Of course you couldn't. Are you all right? Just a bit dinged up, said Fred. Harry and Hermione need help, though. All of us will if we don't get out of here quick. Come on, move it. Mum! George yelled. Terebradent! Hermione cast. The truth-drilling hex whizzed past Mrs. Weasley's left ear and struck the Death Eater who was about to curse her from behind. He howled, in pain, bleeding from his mouth, as Mrs. Weasley slashed her wand and sent him flying head over heels away from her. Phew, thank you, Hermione. She nodded. And that's why you don't mess with a dentist's daughter. They fought their way back towards the exit, Fred, Lee, and Harry quickly rejoining Sirius and moving with him. Despite having only one good arm, Harry was still casting fast and furious. Relatio, impedimentia! Boy, I'm glad to see you, Sirius. Confrigo, lumos ardens, myxinos! Just like the good old days, eh? Sirius said with a determined grin. Levicorpus, Langlock! What good old days? Harry said. We have very different definitions. Fulmina! Harry's lightning curse made contact with Lucius Malfoy, who went sprawling on the floor. Nice one, James. Serious? Ha! Just kidding, Harry. Come on, I've got you. He pulled him away from Fred. Fred, Lee, get yourselves out of here. The boys started to run, but they found themselves blocked by Dolohov, who swept his arm in a complete semicircle, throwing out a nasty-looking cutting curse in a huge arc against the entire Weasley family. Well, looky here, he growled. The last Pruitt and the 2 replacements. Looks like I'll get to complete the set. You will not touch my family again, Mrs. Weasley hissed. And if you want Fred and George, you'll have to go through me, Lee said. Lee, be careful, Mrs. Weasley started. Viscera expellite! Gorgonion! Mrs. Weasley blocked the entrail-expelling curse with a shield even Hermione didn't know, but Dolohov kept it up, casting the darkest curses she had seen all night. Mrs. Weasley took some more knocks, and each time a curse struck George's shared shield, it felt like a slap across the face to Hermione. Citadella! Hermione switched roles and threw up a powerful triple-layered shield, the strongest one she knew, that she hoped would intimidate Dolohov while letting George cast curses around it. The Weasley matriarch was casting faster than Hermione had ever seen her move by their side, but it was still barely enough to slow Dolohov down. The room was in complete chaos by now. They had to step over an unconscious Auror Shacklebolt as Moody tried to help him up and Duel at the same time. Meanwhile, Fred and Lee tried pushing around the other way with a similar shielder-spellcaster strategy. Dolohov spun towards the pair and threw a curse that smashed through Fred's shield, and Fred doubled over like he'd been punched in the gut. Lee's eyes widened when he saw him fall over, and his tongue slipped as he tried to switch from the Tempest Jinx he was casting to a more powerful gouging spell, which resulted in his wand blasting a stream of hot ash at Dolohov's face. It sort of worked, but Dolohov deflected the spell and slashed his wand back with a shout of "Hemorrhagia!" A streak of purple flame spewed out of it as Lee fumbled with his wand. "Lee!" George yelled. The purple curse caught Lee across the throat with no outward effect, but his body dropped like a puppet whose strings had been cut, and he began coughing up what seemed an impossible amount of blood. "Lee, no!" Fred screamed and drove to help him, but Hermione knew enough medicine to know there was no help for what that curse seemed to have done. "Lee, get up!" Hermione's hands were shaking as she watched. Half in a daze and half in rage, she acted without thinking, dropping her triple shield and casting a double bombarda with both wands at Dolohov's back. But the Death Eater was already turning to face the remaining threat, and he shielded just in time. "Mudblood, bitch!" he yelled. "Murderer!" she screamed back. "Hemorrhagia!" He slashed his wand again. There was no time to shield, not against a curse that powerful, but he didn't cast it at her neck this time. He cast it lower at her stomach, which probably saved her life. Doing the only thing she could, she twisted left and let the curse strike her right side where her basilisk skin coat could absorb most of the blow, though it still sent her sprawling on the floor. "Hermione!" George screamed. She felt like she'd been whacked with a cricket bat. Hard, but it was superficial. It hadn't destroyed her stomach or her reproductive organs like he'd surely intended. Rage coursed through her. She had to stop that monster. She coughed once, sucked in as much air as she could, and pushed herself up on one arm to hurl one of the darkest curses in her repertoire. "Epidermolysis bullosa!" Her curse struck true, and Dolohov reeled back and collapsed with a grimace of pain. Hermione was suddenly aware of George helping her to her feet and seemingly checking to make sure she was still alive. Then of Mrs. Weasley shouting as she tried to fend off the other Death Eaters. Then of Fred crying as he sat on the floor clutching Lee's body against his chest. "Lee, no, please, come on, say something, anything." Mr. Weasley wrapped his arms around Fred from behind and pulled him away. Mrs. Weasley did the same for George. "Fred, we have to go," his father said. "No, no, we can save him." "Fred, it's too late. He's gone." It can't be, Hermione thought. How could it be possible that Lee Jordan was dead? He hadn't even had a ring. He wasn't even supposed to be there. And now he was dead, protecting his best friend, who had only come there to protect her. But she couldn't stop. The fighting was still raging. Two of the Death Eaters were blocking the doors, and nothing seemed to budge them. Everyone who could still cast hammered away at them, and the other Death Eaters with hexes whilst dodging dark spells, and even killing curses. Remus went down with a broken leg, and Moody pulled him back, but he kept casting from the ground. One of the masked Death Eaters was tied up and stunned twice, so he couldn't get back up so quickly. They seemed stalemated, and it was only a matter of time before someone else got unlucky. But then one more fighter arrived and tipped the balance. "Dumbledore!" someone yelled as the fugitive headmaster ran into the room, his wand glowing a brilliant white. And just like that, the Death Eaters who could still move scattered, only 5 minutes too late for Lee. McNair picked up Dolohov and managed to make the door with the others. "Hurry!" Dumbledore ordered. "The danger's not over." "They're getting away," Moody growled. "Stun them if you can. Our priority is Harry and the other victims," he said. "Now." He led them out of the planet's room and into the round room, but this time, before it started spinning, he called out, "Exit!" and a door popped open leading back to the long chamber. The Death Eaters were there, running for the lifts. The Order threw tripping jinxes, incarcerous spells, and anything else they could think of to keep them from escaping, or fighting back. McNair ran to the front and managed to slip out with Dolohov, but with Dumbledore on their side, the other 5 were brought down, tied up, and disarmed before they reached the lifts. The order hurried to the lifts themselves, but rather than pressing the button, Dumbledore waved his wand and 3 empty lifts slammed down to their floor at high speeds. "Quickly, we must alert the Aurors," he said. The 11 of them piled into them, Fred and Mr. Weasley carrying Lee's body, and they rose to the atrium, again far faster than normal. Now they only had to reach the flues, but then an even more terrifying sight blocked their path. Voldemort. Hermione had never seen the fully regenerated Voldemort in the flesh, but there was no doubting it was him. He was uncannily tall, with pale, scaly skin, slits for nostrils, and glowing red eyes, and he wore robes so dark they seemed to be cut from the night itself. "You should not have come here, Tom," Dumbledore said calmly. "Potter forced my hand," Dumbledore sneered. "According to my followers, he smashed the prophecy." Dumbledore glanced at Harry. "Then he showed more wisdom than you." "You told him what it said, didn't you, old man? That's why you threw it away so easily, isn't it, Potter?" Dumbledore said nothing. "I should have anticipated that, but no matter. If I can't get the orb, I'll drag it out of you instead, but not before I kill the meddling fool. Avada Kedavra!" Hermione had seen the killing curse for the first time only a few hours earlier, when Stan Shunpike had cast it at her and Harry, but she'd been too shocked to really register the horror of it until now. It was 10 times worse coming from Voldemort. It was impossible to see that jet of green light streaming towards you across the atrium like a missile and not instinctively know it meant instant death. Dumbledore, however, merely summoned the security desk into the path of the curse as casually as if he were batting away a fly. The desk exploded in midair, scattering pieces across the floor. He fired a curse of his own back. Hermione didn't know what it did, but it was so powerful it made her hair stand on end, and Voldemort conjured a physical shield to stop it. He advanced on Dumbledore, and Dumbledore did the same, moving farther ahead of the group. "Shouldn't we help?" Hermione said. Voldemort threw a lightning curse that was far more powerful than Hermione's, so powerful that when Dumbledore deflected it, it blasted chunks off of the stone walls. Hermione found herself dragged behind a column to take cover. "With the magic they're using out there," George said, "we'd be mincemeat. We'll only slow Dumbledore down." "Apparate out," Mr. Weasley ordered from his cover, but he turned on the spot and promptly fell flat on his face. "Strike that," Moody said. "Bastard made an anti-apparition ward." Peeking out, she saw Dumbledore cast a spell that pulled the water out of the fountain in the middle of the atrium and poured it over Voldemort, deflecting the lightning harmlessly into the ground. He then molded the water into a cocoon around Voldemort as if to drown him. But an angry red light grew in the center of the sphere, brighter and brighter, until it exploded into a column of steam. Out of the billowing steam came an enormous serpent made of fire, as large as the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets, which loomed over Dumbledore to strike him down. Dumbledore produced a flaming whip from his own wand and lashed it at the snake, striking it once, twice, 3 times, before he blasted it back hard enough that it exploded in blue jets of flame all over the atrium. George poured Hermione back behind one of the pillars just before the jets scorched them. Voldemort then screamed and waved his wand in a wide arc above his head. There was a tremendous crash, and all the hundreds and thousands of windows in the atrium, towering 7 stories above them, shattered in an instant and were hurled at Dumbledore in a storm of razor-sharp shards of glass. Hermione was awestruck. Just how powerful was Voldemort? How could she ever hope to compete with magic like that? Or Harry, for that matter, the child of the prophecy? And now Dumbledore threw up a shield that didn't block the glass, but ground it down into sand, raising his arm to protect his face from being sandblasted. He then directed the sand back at his foe, trying to entomb him in it as he had before with the water, but Voldemort was ready this time. He apparated out of the way of the stream through his own ward, again and again, faster than Dumbledore could maneuver it. He tried to apparate behind him to get to Harry, but a barrier shimmered across the width of the atrium, one that Hermione hadn't even seen Dumbledore set up, and he bounced back through some non-space to apparate back into the fountain. With a wave of his wand, Dumbledore animated the 5 golden statues in the fountain to attack Voldemort, but Voldemort cast something that crushed all 5 presumably hollow statues into small balls and banished them at the headmaster. Dumbledore deflected these again, and they flew to the corners of the atrium, crashing hard enough to leave craters in the floor. Voldemort sent one killing curse after another at Voldemort, which he blocked with pieces of debris. Hermione felt like she was under cannon fire, even hidden behind the pillar. Dumbledore threw a blast of wind and created what seemed to be a full-sized tornado in the middle of the atrium. The debris swirled around and towards Voldemort, but Voldemort, showing more understanding of the weather phenomenon than Hermione thought he possessed, froze the water on the floor, flooding the atrium with cold and choking off the updraft. He then made the ice lift up, filled with sand and debris, and form into tall golems around Dumbledore, which attacked him. Dumbledore tried to shatter them, but his spell was less effective than it should have been. They only partially shattered, and then reformed their damaged parts. He cast his fire whip again and lashed them to pieces. The whip grew into a firestorm as large as Voldemort's fire serpent and burned away the ice. Then it turned into what looked like a beam of focused sunlight that could melt through solid steel, but Voldemort raised his silver shield and reflected it into the ceiling, slowly tipping it back down at Dumbledore, who was forced to cut it off. Suddenly, the flues roared to life. It was still too early even for the maintenance shift, so it had to mean more reinforcements. But for which side? As figures in brown trench coats began emerging, Hermione breathed a sigh of relief. It was Tonks, Hestia Jones, Amelia Bones, and nearly a dozen other R's rushing into the Ministry, answering the summons. Someone must have finally got the message through. They took one look at the scene and immediately ran for the nearest cover whilst casting curses at Voldemort's back. He stopped casting curses to focus on shielding. Even he had to think twice about fighting whilst surrounded by a dozen trained fighters. In all the commotion, Hermione almost missed the sound of one more flue opening and 3 figures stepping out. "And what is so important you had to drag me out of bed at 5 in the morning, Amos?" Cornelius Fudge. "We both know your boy's gone balmy. You'd be lucky if I don't fire you for—" Fudge stopped dead. He locked eyes with Voldemort. Voldemort surveyed the scene and cut his losses. With a wave of his hand, there was a great crash, and Dumbledore's apparition barrier shattered, and before Dumbledore could set it back up, Voldemort apparated away. "He's back!"